forged on the gridiron in September. Perfected in the magic of March.
Again, rebounded by Indiana. The game is over.
For the fans who love the crunch of the pads, prefer a dunk,
Oh, he just shook the gravity.
and expect nothing but the best. It's Bigger Ten. Here's Steve Deace.
And greetings. Welcome to this week's episode of Bigger Ten. I am Steve Deace alongside my co-host, the one and only Aaron McIntire. Good to see you, my friend. How are you?
Doing well. This is one of my favorite times of the year. In fact, it's probably my favorite sports season of the year. You've got college basketball, college football, NFL, all that stuff converging at once. It's a lot of fun. In fact, right now I've got Stanford versus Indiana up on my iPad right now.
Nice. What's the score, by the way?
It is Stanford's making a comeback here. They're down by 5. I can't remember what the exact score is here. About halfway through the second half, I've got them minus 2.5. So I need them to complete this comeback, but that's neither here nor there.
Indeed, you're getting a degenerate special right here in real time, folks.
Yeah.
In the middle of us taping this week's episode of Bigger Ten. So, with greetings and salutations out of the way, Aaron, let's get to it. It's the Big 5 headlines to break down this week here on Bigger Ten. Let's start with those Ohio State Buckeyes. They are unbeaten no more. No, it's not that they managed to find someone in this conference who can actually beat them on the gridiron. That's not happening. But they ran into an opponent they could not defeat with COVID. Now, it looked a lot worse a week ago when the Illinois game was canceled. And I got to say that when Ohio State said, well, we're doing this out of an abundance of caution, I remembered, hey, Barry Alvarez said that too. Remember, Barry Alvarez originally said, well, we could have played against Nebraska this week, according to Big Ten rules, but out of an abundance of caution, we're going to just shut it down. And then they didn't play for 3 more weeks. Remember that?
Yep.
Right? Didn't it sound like that's what was going on at Ohio State, especially when you found out that Ryan Day had also tested positive? But it turned out that they were willing just to basically sacrifice a non-divisional game to try to set themselves up to have a chance to play these next 2 games in the division against Michigan State and Michigan, although that latter game looks to be in peril. More on that here in a moment. But COVID looks like it's going to deny Ohio State a Big Ten championship with that Michigan game, because Michigan is pausing its football activities because of a COVID outbreak that I think is a lot like the Florida State COVID outbreak, if you know what I'm saying. Which is, hey, I'm sure they have some positive tests, but I don't really get the sense either school's all that excited about playing any more games this year. So it's a good, viable rationale. I don't think they're faking results. I just think they're probably not in any hurry to turn them around, if you know what I mean. All right. And so it looks like Ohio State will be denied a Big Ten championship because of COVID, Aaron. They won't meet the minimum threshold. 12 of the final 14 games in the Big Ten would have to be canceled in order to lower that 6-game requirement according to the league's bylaws. So it looks like they will be denied a Big Ten championship, not because anybody beat them on the field, but COVID beat them off of it. And now the question becomes, will they be able to put together enough of a resume to make the college football playoff? Because let's face it, that was one of the big reasons that the Big Ten decided to go ahead and play this season, was because of the kind of team Ohio State had coming back.
We ended, I don't know if it was this segment or this show last week, by talking about Northwestern and Ohio State. Who's going to beat them? And I think I said, well, barring COVID doing, well, what it's done all year. Well, that barring is here now a week later.
Yeah.
It's astounding, but it's at the same time not surprising. The unprecedented is now precedented on a daily basis now. If you're Ohio State, though, you got to look at the bright side. There is already a built-in handicap with the college football playoff that you don't have to have a minimum number of games to be considered to making the playoff. So you could see a number of teams out there that are vying for contention that could drop 1, maybe even 2 games. You're sitting there at 5-0. You probably won't get any more games in this year, you definitely won't be making it to the championship because you got to play a minimum of 6 games. And barring a miracle turnaround next week and getting the game back on, that's probably not going to happen. You're sitting back, you're relaxing, you can practice, and basically you're hoping either COVID strikes one of those other teams that's probably going to jump ahead of you, or they lose one of those games, because you've put 5 games on tape. You beat the only team in the Big Ten in the conference outside of Team COVID that had a chance of beating you, and that was Indiana. So you've already basically proven what you can prove this year. Who else were they going to prove their mettle to in the Big Ten this year, Steve? Maybe Northwestern with that defense, but still, I think you've done already what you can do. You were already probably going to want some help, not necessarily need it, but want some help getting into the playoff anyway. It's just this year. It's just this year. All hope is not lost, but at the same time, you are kind of disappointed if you're an Ohio State fan.
Let's fast forward this a little bit from an Ohio State perspective. Let's say the game is off, but Michigan could be cleared to play on championship weekend. If you're Ohio State, obviously Fox's executives would rather have the Michigan-Ohio State game than the Big Ten championship game, but that's not going to happen, obviously. So, if you're Ohio State, would you rather prefer to go ahead? Let's hang 70 on a beleaguered, beaten down, quitting in real time imploding Michigan program, or are you realizing that probably doesn't help your playoff resume at all? You only have so many games to impress the committee. Do you say, we're going to go ahead and play Wisconsin because they're probably ranked, and that would do more for our resume, right? What decision, if you're Ohio State, if you're given that option, which decision would you make?
Well, if you were given that option, and that's a big if at this point, but given that the Big Ten, when it comes to COVID and trying to get more games in or changing things with the game, they've been pretty rigid. There's basically no scheduling flexibility that at least I've seen from the Big Ten this year. But let's just say that's allowed to happen. Go for it. If I was Ohio State, go for it. I mean, you want to put everything you can on your resume.
So go play Wisconsin instead.
Go play Wisconsin. Yeah. Go play anybody who will take you, essentially. I think you want to put as much as you can, but at the same time, even if you can't play in that Champions Week, I still don't think all hope is lost for you.
Well, let's go to Champions Week, because it now looks like a foregone conclusion. Northwestern has officially won the Big Ten West. With its game canceled against Minnesota, it's already at the 6-game threshold. It has the tiebreaker and still a game on your Iowa Hawkeyes. So they are the Big Ten West champions. They did go from first to worst and back to first, but it is looking pretty close to certain that their opponent is going to be Indiana, who sadly has lost Michael Penix for the year with a torn ACL. And now you wonder, yes, he's looked good this year, but you wonder about his development. This is going to be a second year in a row now. He won't have any spring ball because he's going to be rehabbing that knee injury, of course. Now, they do have a former 4-star recruit and a transfer from Utah backing him up. So I don't think, they're going to have a quarterback situation, as pathetic as, say, Michigan's. But it's clearly a drop-off from a guy that was a real playmaker. But it looks like they've already won the East, so unless Michigan comes up with a reason to go ahead and play the game and thinks it's cured enough COVID to do so. So are you ready for a Northwestern-Indiana Big Ten championship game? Indiana last won even a share of the Big Ten championship in 1967, almost a decade before I was born. And they went on and lost to O.J. Simpson and USC in the Rose Bowl that year. What do you think?
I think odds for Northwestern, preseason odds, were somewhere in the 50, maybe 60 to 1 range. Indiana, I think it was a little bit lower, maybe 40 to 1. Good Lord, if you're sitting on one of those tickets, or
you
both
put
of them,
10 or 20 bucks on that.
You're having
Christmas.
A good Christmas this year. Yeah, and so it's the only, looking back at this year and at this season, we're all consenting adults here, as you like to say, Steve. Let's just be honest with each other. This was the only only Big Ten championship game that was going to happen. Okay, let's just be honest. The only other thing that could have happened is if North Dogwood Tech joined the Big Ten and somehow won the championship.
Right.
That's just the way that this year has gone.
This is the on-brand 2020 Big Ten championship game. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and that's nothing against either one of those teams. You know, if it was Michael Penix versus Northwestern's defense, that would have been an entertaining game. But now it's just going to be kind of running in quicksand. That's what I would predict for this game anyway. Penix's backup, I can't remember his name, but
Jake Tuttle, I think is his name.
He's not that bad, but it's not going to be the Ohio State versus Wisconsin of last year matchup that was really exciting in the first half and really for the whole game, but especially in the first half. I don't think there's going to be much excitement with this one to speak of anyway. So
let's go next to Michigan. A tradition unlike any other. Late November, the Michigan program implodes, okay? And we are watching it yet now. Again, we've already mentioned the COVID issues that are going on there. I mean, Kirk Herbstreit was on the playoff show last night, literally saying, I think you might just see Michigan wave the white flag there. And I know a bunch of Michigan people got upset at him for saying that, but the reality is if you frequent Michigan fan message boards, and you know I do, there is already all kinds of that talk all day long. I'm totally in favor of shutting the season down for COVID. In fact, I wanted it shut down after the Michigan State loss. I wanted this torture porn known as Michigan football to end. Some of you may say, well, Steve, where's the competitor in you? Hey, listen, I'm a competitor. But ultimately, a nail doesn't compete with a hammer. An ant doesn't compete with a boot. And a turkey every fourth Thursday in November doesn't compete with a knife. You know what I'm saying? Okay?
Right.
After a while, you realize this isn't a competition. It's a slaughterhouse. Get the hell out. Okay? And I'm totally fine if this is the last game they play. I'm totally, and which means, by the way, this becomes the first Michigan team ever. This is confirmed because the Maryland game is definitely off. This would be the first Michigan team ever to not win a home game in the history of the winningest program in the history of intercollegiate football. All kinds of speculation about Jim Harbaugh's job and will he move on to the NFL? Will Michigan move on from him? You know, I have talked a ton about this, and you listened to me kvetch for 40 minutes yesterday while I was taping Michigan podcast, right? So it's time to hear from somebody else, an outsider's perspective on this. So I am going to be quiet, and the floor is now yours.
So, at the risk of sounding cliche, but as I've always said, with every cliche, there's a grain of truth there. If it were any other team, basically, you could chalk this up to it's just a weird year, it's just an off year, it's just a COVID year,
like Penn State. What's going on there?
But
who came in and kicked Michigan's ass, by the way. Yeah.
But the cliche part here. It's not the way it's going down. The way it's going down is the unacceptable part. If you're a Michigan fan, you know, it's not like you've got a young team, but it's not like they're going out there and showing flashes like, 50% or 49% of the time. And then the other 51% of the time, it's mediocre to dumb, boneheaded mistake.
Yep.
That's when you're showing flashes and you're showing promise. Like if it was the Minnesota game and it's just your defense sucked and, you know, you're in a shootout and one mistake or two or three, whatever, you just can't overcome that.
No, this is systemic. Yeah.
This is systemic. Yeah. Some of the things that I've heard you tell me, I'm not going to go into detail, but if you watched the show, especially seasons 3 and 4 of Last Chance of You, you'll know the coach Jason Brown and his downfall. And what we're seeing from Jim Harbaugh, and I want to go into a little bit more detail with this kind of analog, is the flip side of that coin. Whereas if something went south with Jason Brown's program, if something went south with personnel, he would get violent. He would get violent, verbally abusive, whatever. What I'm seeing from Jim Harbaugh is the same type of behavior, except instead of getting violent, Harbaugh is going, it's embarrassing, I would say, just from the outside looking in.
Yeah.
And it's...
Trust me, it's embarrassing from the inside out,
looking
brother.
out, and it's insulting. I've used that word before. I mean, I would love to see some of the programs and some of the coaches what could do with the purse and the power that Jim Harbaugh wields within that program, with their program. I'd love to see what could happen with that. But instead, you've got what's going on right now, and it's I don't know I don't know what to tell you. It's
emasculating to watch.
Emasculating
to watch a team bleed out and then quit in real time, right? You know, and if half of what I have been told by people that are very credible sources, if half of what they've told me this week is true, then the idea that, hey, Jim just reinvents his coaching staff like Brian Kelly did in 2016 when they went 4-8, and we're beyond a reboot. I mean, you need a cleansing. I mean, we're going to have to call an exorcist, okay? Let me give you just one example. This one I will say on the air. After the Rutgers game, which Michigan won in triple overtime, which frankly feels more embarrassing in some respects than having lost it. After the game, Joe Milton said to the coaches, I'm going to transfer somewhere else and come back here and put 50 on your asses.
Yikes.
The next week when Cade McNamara got hurt, Joe Milton was put back in the game after saying that. You do stuff like that with your younger player, particularly a team this young. These guys are developing and they see this, you know what I'm saying? That will wreck your culture. And I know people don't want to hear about what it was like when Bo and stuff was here, but I'm just telling you, the coaches that won championships at places like Michigan or really anywhere else, you'll put the 7th string walk-on in and tell her and then gather the team on the sidelines and say, hey, your job is to rally around this guy. He's our guy. You'll do that before you put that cat who said that about you back in the game.
Yeah. And you're going to point to the east and you say, hey, you see that silhouette over there?
Yeah.
That's Joe Milton. He's still walking home from Piscataway.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. You don't do stuff like that, man. And I think there's this notion that, well, you know, we told you when you hired Harbaugh, you know, he's hard driving and he wears people out. We didn't get that Jim Harbaugh, guys. If we did, he'd have won at least a Big Ten championship. We got the guy who came here and thought, man, I can relax now. I'm home. Chewy, we're home. It's my destination job. I can put my feet up. No, we didn't get the hard driving, merciless coach who's alienated a bunch of people. We'd have won more if we gotten that guy. No, we got friggin' something else, man. I don't know what we got, but a guy that clearly and sadly ain't our Jimmy anymore. He's just a guy that just lost his edge. And you're watching that play out now with an irredeemably broken culture within the football program. And, you know, Michigan's and him are either going to move on from each other this year or they'll be doing it a year from now. That's the most likely scenario. And that'll be 12 more months of damage to the program. It's just a matter of whether or not they want to do this now or later when it will be even worse. Let's get to a good story in the state of Michigan. Now, this is not a good football team, which is what makes this such a good story. All right. I told you at the start of the year, I thought Michigan State might go winless. And that wasn't just Michigan fan trolling. I mean, looking at my analytic numbers and their schedule, I saw one game on the schedule that I had Michigan State clearly favored in the game. Well, then that was the season opener against Rutgers. What happened in that game?
They lost.
All right. So I think this is not going well. He had no offseason. Remember, he already got hired late after signing day, remember, because of what D'Antonio pulled. And then we had the COVID shutdown. So Mel Tucker has no offseason with his team at all. He's beaten Michigan and now a top 10 Northwestern team. If those are the only two games they win this year, from a branding standpoint, to establish you as a new coach, and trust me, I am saying this through gritted teeth right now as a Michigan fan, but I'll tell it like it is, even when it's very, very painful in a proctology exam sort of way for me to say so. That is probably, if you're being honest about the personnel he inherited, that is beyond the best case first year scenario for Mel Tucker. This has been a resounding success to establish him as a credible successor to Mark D'Antonio.
It's not there on the record yet, but there's no doubt. I mean, he's off and fortuitously wise, you know, just luck wise. He's off to a better start now here at Michigan State than he was at Colorado, I would argue. Yeah. Especially when you see what's going on with Big Brother in state and what could go down there. So again, we keep talking about kind of the between the ears thing this season. That's been one of the major themes on Bigger Ten. You could easily lose a locker room when you lose to Rutgers. When you get housed by Iowa, when your Iowa's, both Iowa and Rutgers slump busters.
49 to
7 or something like that. You could easily lose the locker room. How did you get back up in the middle of November? In the middle of November, or the late part of November, whatever. And you go and you put the fight to Northwestern and eke out a win there. That shows me that those guys are buying into something there. I don't know what it is yet, but it's probably him. Something in his message. He was able to keep their attention and get them to buy in, and that's good news for Sparty. That's good news for Sparty, because I've been on as low, or if not lower, as you've been on Michigan State this year. I had them going winless in our predictions before the season, and they've definitely exceeded those expectations.
Another good thing for Sparty, they went into Cameron Indoor. Now it ain't quite the same. Let's be honest about that, okay? But still, you go to Cameron Indoor and beat Duke with their parade of McDonald's All-Americans. No matter how many people are or are not in the stands, it's impressive. Michigan State did that. They had a 25-point turnaround in that game, from down 10 to up 15, before ultimately coasting to victory against Duke last night. And so we'll have much more on Big Ten basketball as we get more into the winter. But looking at the start that this league has, and I mean, most people think that's the fourth or fifth best team in our league. If that's the fourth or fifth best team in our league, yikes. I mean, the depth that we are seeing in this conference, and you can tell it's not even just, this has been a deep league. Remember, we were talking a couple of years ago, when they debuted the net rankings, remember that?
Yep.
Could we get 9 or 10 Big Ten teams in? A couple of years ago, we were having that conversation. The difference was a lot of that was quality depth, because those guys could play grind you down defensive basketball, right?
Right.
But what you're seeing so far with these, I mean, Rutgers putting up point totals in the 80s. The skill level here is higher. And I don't know if you've noticed that based on what you've been playing so far in terms of college basketball wagering, but a lot of these Big Ten games have gone over so far. It's not just the depth. This has been the best league for the last few years in college basketball, but there's more skill on the floor for these teams too.
Yeah, and I don't bet Big Ten basketball that much. I don't really bet any of the big leagues or big conferences that much, but that's what you would hope and expect this year, and especially with the routine, I guess you could call it now, that the Big Ten has gotten into. And I think that's an important distinction there, because it's one thing to just win games. It's another to do so while putting up lots of points. The reason why you see the NBA go up into the hundreds of totals, well, they have 8 extra minutes in a game to do that. But it's also because there's a ton of skill. Every single position on the floor is the best player or one of the top 10 players or 10 to 15 whatever players at that position, or at least has a chance to be on a night in and night out basis. And so that's why you see so many high point totals in the NBA. It's not just because they have extra time to do it. It's because they're all skilled in the college level. You don't see that quite so much. But now you are with the Big Ten, because, like you said, there is a lot of skill there. So it's not only is it a difficult league, there's a lot of entertaining teams and a lot of entertaining games, but just in general, the baseline expectation is a lot of points scored, and that's always, just from a viewing perspective, that's always a lot of fun to watch.
And as I said, we'll have even more on Big Ten basketball as we get further into the winter and the season. But when we come back, this week's game of Big Ten Would You Rather. And let's get to it. It's this week's game of Big Ten Would You Rather here on Bigger Ten, I should say. Aaron, this one is for you. Would you rather give your coach a break for a bad season in a COVID year, or make a move now to take advantage of a market that won't have as much hiring competition? Let me give you an example where Michigan's concerned. It looks like Texas is going to make a move, but let's say they don't. If you're Michigan, you make a move this year, it's basically just you and Texas, and you have your pick of the litter, right? But a year from now, Auburn could be open. Tennessee could be open. USC could be open. You see where I'm going?
Yep.
Nebraska may be open a year from now. Do you say, hey, let's not make any rash decisions given the oblong year we are having? Or do you do what South Carolina did, which is, hey, we might get a coach maybe better than we'd get in a normal year because, there's not a lot of supply of hiring, so let's take advantage of that. Which would you do?
If you are in a position where you're probably, it just depends on the position, but that's not the way this game is played. So I would always kind of err on the side of giving your coach a little bit of a break. Now, if you are Michigan, if this is pertaining specifically to Michigan.
They can or can't, that's your call.
Yeah, okay. If this is applying specifically to Michigan or somebody who just has not proven themselves or met the expectations, rational or otherwise, of the fan base and of the administration, of the athletics director, whatever then you would get rid of him now because of the argument that you just made. But as an all-encompassing statement, I would say you'd rather cut him a little bit of slack this year.
Okay.
Next is for you. Would you rather be Michigan or Texas football right now?
That's a difficult question.
And I know this is Bigger Ten, but
yeah, because they're extremely similar. They're two of the top 3 winningest programs of all time. They're 2 of the highest rated public universities academically that play football at a blue blood level. They're just very, very similar. They're also in a decade now of trying to find out who their next guy is. We are in the same position. They ran Mac Brown, what was it, about a year or 2 after Lloyd Carr retired. So, it is. You go back to that 2005 Rose Bowl when they played each other, and how great that game's on ESPN Classic all the time. Okay, or on Big Ten Classics all the time. That's a great Rose Bowl, and Vince Young won the game in the final seconds. Both programs seem a long way off from what they had going in that game. If I don't care, like let's say I'm Urban Meyer-esque of a coach, but I'm not Urban Meyer specifically. So I don't have his baggage, or I didn't coach Michigan's rival. Okay. But I'm that level of an established coach. Then I would rather coach at Texas, because obviously I've got a much bigger in-state talent pool. And as good as Lincoln Riley in Oklahoma is, I probably think I've got a better chance against them than on a perennial basis than I do up against where Ohio State is at right now, as it relates to the rest of the Big Ten. But if I'm not that kind of coach, if I'm an up and coming coach, and so this is one of these jobs is my next job, unless I am from Texas, I think I'd rather be at Michigan, and here's why. Because Michigan will let you just coach football from an autonomy standpoint. Michigan doesn't have the booster alumni network that Texas does in terms of cooks in the kitchen, if you know what I'm trying to say.
Yep.
Both schools raise, the gross domestic product of Latin American countries and then spend that. But Michigan doesn't have a network of people that you've got a glad hand on a daily basis before you even get to practice. Texas does. And I think if I'm a younger coach and maybe I haven't, if I'm a Luke Fickell or a Jeff Hafley at Boston College, and I haven't fully established myself yet, and at Cincinnati and Boston College, I don't have to deal with those kinds of alumni networks. And now suddenly I'm thrust into this role where I do. Like Mac Brown came from North Carolina, okay? And North Carolina's had a good football program over time, but it's a basketball school. However, from a basketball standpoint, North Carolina does have that kind of alumni network. And so he had already seen what it's like to interact with that all the time, right? And so it wasn't a surprise for him when he went to Texas. If you're a Luke Fickell, Jeff Hafley kind of a coach at BC, it's a dramatic change. And at Michigan, you don't have to deal with that. You don't have to be a de facto governor and all kinds of media appearances and things of that nature if you don't want to. And there's more of a chance to just coach the team if that's what you want to do. So I think it depends on your situation. For you, would you rather change the defensive pass interference rule in college football to align with the NFL's, which is that it's a spot foul everywhere on the field unless it's in the end zone and then it's at the 2-yard line? Or would you rather leave it as it is, which is it's a spot foul if it's within 15 yards. If it's past 15 yards, then it's a 15-yard penalty.
I leave it as is. I think it's fun in the NFL. If you're going to do something like the spot foul, then do what we've talked about before, which is make that the targeting penalty. I think the way it is right now is fine. I've never really quite understood it. It's fun. It still doesn't make that much sense in the NFL. Yes, it's pass interference. Yes, you're making it more difficult to catch the ball or impossible to catch the ball. But how many times have you seen guys drop wide open passes? In the NFL, it happens less often, but in the college ranks, you still got to catch the ball and just give them a spot foul. That just seems ridiculous to me, so I would leave it as is.
Obviously, I asked that question because I think they should change it to the NFL rule, and I wasn't sure where you stood, so I was kind of hoping you had the other perspective so I could consider it, but all right, fair enough.
Last one is for you. Would you rather be Penn State or Northwestern basketball right now? Two teams largely considered to be near the bottom of the Big Ten this year.
I think I'd rather be Northwestern. Obviously, they've won an NCAA tournament game more recently than Penn State has. But listen, if you can get the third or fourth tier of talent out of your state on a regular basis, you should at least be competitive at a Northwestern. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, Penn State has Pennsylvania and stuff, but Happy Valley is a remote outpost in that state. So I think I'd rather be Northwestern, especially with the new arena and stuff there. They have a relatively new arena at Penn State, but we've seen Northwestern be competitive and successful more regularly in recent times. I mean, Penn State was good last year. They, I think, won the NIT or something a couple of years before that, right? But then you got to go back to like the Taylor Battle teams. So yeah, I think I'd rather be Northwestern than Penn State, but it's a close call, that's for sure. When we come back, our Twitter poll and then our question of the week to wrap it up next. This week's Twitter poll results. We asked you, who will coach Michigan football in 2021? 67.4% of you said someone else. 32.6% of you said Jim Harbaugh. Where would you vote on that, Aaron, if you had one?
Jim Harbaugh.
You would vote on Harbaugh.
Because you have a president who doesn't care about athletics. So this is like, oh my goodness. We let you guys play. Now you want a new coach. It's, next thing you know, you're going to want a stadium, right? That kind of thing. Exactly.
Yeah, I hear you.
So I would say that. And just because, I mean, it's good for the Big Ten when Nebraska's good, although they haven't been that good when they've been with the Big Ten. But it's good. It would be good for the
we keep hearing it'd be good if Nebraska was good. We keep hearing that. We're kind of waiting for it.
It's always good when the Blue Bloods are good. It's always good for the brand. And so it behooves Big Ten fans to have Michigan football be respectable. Right now, they're not.
No,
they've been good. Right now, they're not respectable.
No, they're an embarrassment. Is what it is.
So, so because of that, and because nothing good happens right now, I'm going to say that Jim Harbaugh is going to continue there next year.
My life, my old man never let me quit anything ever. One time he let me quit, and it's when I didn't make the basketball team at Jackson Park Junior High in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I tried wrestling. And I was a huge pro wrestling fan, like, Saturday nights, NWA wrestling with Ric Flair and the Four Horsemen. And then, of course, I was a big-time Hulkamaniac. I'd never, Vision Quest was rated R, so I didn't get a chance to watch it. I didn't know what amateur wrestling was. Like, I didn't know what a Dan Gable was growing up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, okay? And so wrestling, I'm like, dude, man, this is going to be like what I watch on TV. And I go in there and I'm like, working on my figure 4 leg lock and stuff. And then the first practice, they hand me a water polo helmet, a singlet, and said, all right, let's do some bear crawls. And I'm like, Toto ain't in Kansas anymore. And I was a really late bloomer, and so that singlet did not bulge where it was supposed to and then bulged in areas it wasn't, if you know what I'm saying, okay? It was just a hugely humiliating exercise. I won one match. Sparta High School had some kind of outbreak, or middle school had some kind of an outbreak, and so there was no one to wrestle me at my weight, which is like 130 pounds or something. And so I got to win. But midway through the season, my dad finally came to me and he's like, "You enjoying this?" And I'm like, "No." You can. This is kind of embarrassing all of us. If you're embarrassed, you can kind of shut it down. And I gladly quit. That's the only thing he ever let me quit my whole life. It's only, and that's how I feel about Michigan football. Like when the COVID thing came out today, I was like, "Do you guys want to keep playing?" I'm sure they would be like, "No." I'm like, "Yeah, because you're embarrassing the hell out of us. So go ahead and shut her down." Let's get to this week's question of the week. Can we convince Michigan to give Jim Harbaugh a lifetime contract? That's from the smartasses and the rest of the Big Ten. Man, I sure hope not.
Is that seriously on the table?
No, not giving him a lifetime contract. No. What'll happen is one of two things, and I really think it's up in the air. Amicable parting of the ways, or they'll give him some token extension and give him another year. And it'll be some token extension, so it won't kill recruiting, but it won't have like some massive buyout. It'll be one of those two things. If I had to predict right now, I don't think he'll coach next year. But I think it's like 52-48, if that makes sense. I think it's kind of back and forth. It should be 99-1, though. Just my opinion. That'll be it for this week's episode of Bigger 10. We will be back at it again next week. Don't forget to like, rate, subscribe, share, 5-star review, whether it's YouTube, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, no matter how you access Bigger 10 each week. Keep those coming. Keep giving us 5-star reviews on your podcast platform if you like what we do. And we'll see you again next time right here on Bigger 10.